my aim is to ask some of the questions, both Nigel and Hema, and obviously you can ask questions as well, both online or here physically. I've basically been working for 28 years of my life. I worked for ExxonMobil effectively for all of that period. I basically spent most of my life travelling the world until COVID hit, and then all my travel completely stopped. So it's very strange when you've been in that environment where you're constantly travel as part of your job. My focus was basically on delivering IT transformational projects, either reimagining the way that we do things offshore, so remote oil fields and gas fields, to major corporate solutions as well, so putting in ERP systems or end-to-end IT solutions. Since then, I've now set up my own practice, which I'm focusing on basically transformational activities and helping others. I'd like to help other leaders develop and deliver their companies and become more effective. In addition to that, I'm obviously a member of the BCS, but I'm also an assessor for the BCS for fellowships, CITPs and CEng. And so some of you have applied for your fellowship, you may well have been interviewed by me, or I may well have read your actual CV when you were joining. Okay, so that's me. So I'll pass it over to Hema. And Hema, you'd like to just introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but what better way of doing a future of work session than having somebody remote in, right? For those of you who don't know me, my name's Hema Purohit. I'm the Chief Architect and CTO for Healthcare and Public Sector across EMEA for Microsoft. Like Jonathan, yourself and Nigel, been in industry and technology for, I think this is year 29, but I've kind of lost count a little bit now. And in healthcare specifically, very deeply for about the last 17 years. So for me, technology is a great place to start in terms of providing solutions for people, but I'm actually somebody who's very much focused on business outcomes. And for me, that bridge is technology. It's not the end result, though. It's how we get there, and it's why we're trying to get there that's important to me. I also do some work independently, so I am an independent advisor. I do some work with startups, specifically healthcare startups globally. And I also do some work freelancing as well. So a few hats like yourself. Looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Hema. Okay. All right, and then over to Nigel, who's in the room with me.
Yeah, I'm the other half of the experiment where I'm actually in the room. So I spent 3 hours, 4 trains to travel 30 miles to get here in person, and I hope that isn't the future of work for sure. So it was quite painful getting here tonight, but I'm glad to be here. I come from the north of Ireland originally, went to the University of Ulster. I don't know if there's any other Ulster alumni on the call or Queen's alumni. And my first job was Harland and Wolff, the shipbuilders in Belfast, who is famous or infamous for building a very famous luxury ocean-going liner that ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic just over 100 years ago. That's where I got my sort of taster, not for shipbuilding and heavy engineering, which was probably a good decision to exit that at the time. But I got my taste for IT, and really it was the logic of business analysis, which is where I got the taste for that. And then my first job after uni was with Exxon Chemical at the chemical plant in Foley. And I, like John, have spent over 25 years in the oil and gas industry. I guess I would see myself as a global business technology leader. If I look back, I'm not a deep technologist, and I take my hat off to a lot of the folks who are today working in robotics and data analytics and so on, data science and all of the other technology streams. But I think really my career has been spanning business and IT. And when I look back over the last 2 decades, probably, many of my roles have really been in change management, and we've been facing a lot of change. We see that every day in life. I think we've had a shift from on-site, face-to-face, co-located teams 20 or 30 years ago, and to the point that over the last 15 years, most of my work has been working in global remote teams where I've sat at the desk with my phones on in front of a screen. So that's the shift in the organizational model for work. I think the pace of technology adoption we've seen changed dramatically over the last 10 years. So from laptops and mainframes and databases 20, 30 years ago, and the pace of technology adoption and the complexity and the diversity of technology to be integrated has been a big theme for the last couple of years. And then I think recently, and something I'm currently working on, having left the company I was working for, now doing some consulting for a fintech agile startup, now seeing the shift from waterfall to agile techniques. So the methods, so organization, technology change, and then processes and methods in how we work. I think I've seen a lot of that, and that's a lot of change to deal with for us as individuals and for small companies as well. So I think looking forward to the discussion tonight, and yeah, all the questions.
Thanks, Nigel. Okay, so for those that are online, if you're happy to do so, in the chat you can post questions as you think of them, and we'll hopefully get to some of those at the end of the session. We'll leave the last 30 minutes for that. But I thought I'll start off with some warm-up questions, get Nigel and Hema going, and see where we go from that, and hopefully we'll expand on some of those. So I guess the first one for me is, thinking, really, what does work look like for you today? Looking back at your past, it's great, but what do you actually do today, and how is it changed from where you perhaps were, a year ago? So maybe I'll open that to you first, Hema.
Sure. It's a really interesting question, actually, because I started consulting about 20-ish years ago, and I was probably at the start of this cycle when, remote working, being away from a physical office location wasn't really cool at that time. It was just starting, and it was quite difficult. It was quite isolating, but there was also this concept of having to be logged on all the time. And I think, as I've seen remote working and flexible working, adapt over time, I think the best way of describing it is that flexibility has come with it. That's the biggest change for me, which is flexibility and freedom. It's okay to work from home, from a bus, from your car, in the airport while you're en route to a flight, hopefully somewhere decent. But it's taken away some of that stress and that pressure. I know that during the pandemic there are probably conflicting views on that. Some people felt that they were working all the time, but equally I think having the ability to decide how you work and when you work is actually liberating in itself. It's not the technology that's keeping us stuck to our desks, in front of our desks. That's a personal thing. That's us feeling obliged to sit in front of a computer all day and make sure that we're a lot online and visible. But I think having the adaptability is something that's really changed. And I think also, the fact that it's open, it's embracing the world. Suddenly the world has become much smaller through remote working. You don't have to wait until you can physically see some of your colleagues, if you work in a large corporate or you work in a global company. And for me, that's great. That's fascinating, just being able to actually communicate with diverse people, with colleagues that are in different countries and different time zones. So it's bringing that real flair of color and diversity, I think, into a lot of daily operational conversations that potentially we didn't have before. So I think, for me, it's that evolution of what does flexible really mean that's really changing.
Okay. So for you, Hema, I guess you've enjoyed the ability to have that sort of diversity of work, really.
I have. I mean, I'm somebody, I like physical interaction with people. I get energized from sort of being in a room with people and, brainstorming and having those conversations. And I really missed that while we were in the pandemic, because sitting alone in your study or your room, with a whiteboard just isn't as much fun. But I think, being able to do that collaboratively with people and still get other people's input and, collaboration, depending, irrelevant of where they are and which time zone they're in, that's been really important for me, to be able to just not lose that. I think if it was 20 years ago and we were limited in the technology that was available, it would have been very isolating. It would have been a very different story if we'd had this pandemic 20 years ago.
Absolutely. So for you, Nigel, what's life looking like for you?
Yeah, well, I think I had my first small business trip on Monday to Paris, again via train, Eurostar, which was a painful experience, but that's another story. So that was the first business trip in 2 years. So, if anybody had said 2 years ago, we're going to shut down all flights globally for 2 years, you would say, no way, right? It would take an amazing event that we'd never seen to do that. And if you go back through, some of the terrorist events, the most that the terrorists could do was shut down airlines, flights for 2 to 3 days, going back 20 years ago. So that whole concept of the skies being empty and not traveling was really, really weird, but very nice at the time. I think one of the things I would take away is that work is no longer a place. I think we always thought of work as stuff you do, 9 to 5, whatever it might be, but it was anchored to a location. Now, a lot of jobs are, of course, anchored to physical locations for the nature of the job, but in the sort of professional and IT area, technology area, work is no longer a place. I think the other thing is work. There's a lot of discussion about people changing jobs at the moment and the Great Resignation. I read. I do still pick up the odd physical newspaper, and there's an article here from earlier this year in the FT from Emma Jacobs in Business Life, which I happened to stumble across last week, and it's fascinating because it asks the question about Netflix and Amazon, and are they competing against each other? And the article goes to say that they're not. Amazon or Netflix are actually competing against sleep, right? So you start to think, okay, that's really insightful, because yes, they can compete against each other for which movies we watch, but actually they're trying to compete for all of our waking time, because the more we watch, the more that we pay. So I got into thinking about the future of work and the Great Resignation, and I'm probably not answering the direct question here, Jonathan, but I think the parallel I then said was, employers are now competing, and I can go and work for employer A or employer B, but actually the pandemic has taught us, most of us, or many of us, that we're not competing for different types of work. I'm now competing, it's work versus family, free time, vocational activities, doing something richer with my life. So yes, I can change my job and flip from company A to company B, and maybe be co-located or hybrid working or different technology or better challenges. But actually that is not where we're at in this sort of step into the 21st century. Many people are now choosing to take less money, relocate to different location, do less hours. The four-day week is now coming up. So I think as we think about the future of work, it's there's some people have a choice, and they're now saying, well, do I actually want to work or want to work to the same extent? So I think there's some interesting dynamics going on, because today I think folks are saying, well, I don't want to go to an office to work, but when you're at home, there's other distractions that may want to take you away from online paid activity. Yeah.
So is that perhaps something that surprised you, that people are perhaps not as willing to work as much as they used to?
Well, I would say I think it is, and I think there's a generation, and we've seen it, with a lot of our colleagues not so much in Europe, but maybe in the US, Jonathan, who are digging deep, and the work ethic is perhaps still there, but it's the motivation and the fact that it's not work-life balance anymore. It's about life choices and life priorities. And then how do I fit work around that? Now, this is a big topic, and getting off the sort of technology-centered discussion probably. But I do think that's a challenge now. We're now seeing that play out where the workforce is shrinking as well. A lot of people have gone part-time, maybe taken retirement plans earlier, and not choosing to go back to the workforce. So that's a challenge as well, is how do you keep the GDP flowing where there's less people maybe going into the workforce.
Yeah, well, I think it does tie into technology, and if you think about it, if we want people to be more productive during the time they work, then we're going to have better ways of dealing with that, through automation or intelligence. Yeah. So I guess, Hema, from your perspective, I think it's nice for, let's say, the people of a generation that have perhaps earned quite good money can make the choice to decide to to do less work because they can still have a comfortable life. Have you been engaged with any sort of people that are obviously starting up in work and haven't got such luxury, and that, you know, they can't choose to work a 4-day week and might actually, I want to work a 7-day week because I need to earn some more money?
I have, and actually, you know, I would say that, and I am going to say this, it might be a bit controversial, but actually, you know, the younger generation that I speak to on a regular basis, and I do a bit of mentoring outside of sort of the corporate sphere, and I'm always amazed at resilience and the forward thinking actually that some of the younger generations, you know, show me. And there's a theme there, which is, yes, we might not be earning huge amounts of money. We might just be starting on the corporate ladder or, you know, in professions, but it's okay to not earn and have, you know, huge amounts of money. And actually, you know, going back to what Nigel said around the work ethic, again, maybe a bit of a controversial thought, but, you know, is it really a work ethic to be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, right? I mean, we accepted that as something that was normal 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But was it, you know, was it actually something that we should have been doing? You know, should we have done that? Or perhaps should we 30 years ago have made a firmer stand to say, I'm going to enjoy my life while I've got it? You know, you only get one go at life. You only get one chance to make the most of it. And it's taken a pandemic where actually every single person has been forced to sit at home to reassess their life. And, you know, yes, there are lots of people who have done the great resignation, so to speak. And I actually don't think it's necessarily about resigning and just switching jobs. I think it's actually about switching lifestyle and switching mindset. It's about, what do I want now? And I think with a lot of the younger generations and people just starting out, what I'm seeing is that actually the level of ambition has perhaps been tamped down slightly. There isn't a mad rush to go and earn huge amounts of money. It's actually much more balanced and sensible outlook on life, which is, I want to go and have a job, but I don't want to kill myself in the process. I want to enjoy my life. I want to keep enough time for family and friends, and actually for personal interests and well-being. So I'm actually seeing that rather than, you know, let's go away and you know, do lots of hours and work like crazy hours.
So I guess I'll touch on something that actually Christine's just posted now, which was I was also going to bring in, Hema, and that's obviously, you know, most people now are constantly connected, and that's either connected to work or connected to personal lives. So even though they don't perhaps traditionally do the 5-day week, 7-8 hour work, or 60 hours a week, actually in an office, in reality are probably could do more because they've always connected on the phone, or they've got email access, or they're checking accounts and things. Do you see that obviously being?
I do, and we saw huge spikes in burnout, you know, over the last 2 years when, you know, people who traditionally hadn't worked at home suddenly found that they needed to be accessible all the time. Now, that's not a technology thing, and I will say that again. I think that's a mindset thing. That's down to us as individuals, where again we've normalized having your phone on all the time, you know, taking your work mobile up to sleep with you. It's on your bedside table, the light flashes, and you feel guilty if you don't go and check it. That comes down to personal boundaries, right? And it's very, very difficult because I've been one of those people that's had the phone on, you know, and it has constantly been switched on. It takes a lot of time and effort to actually train yourself to get to the point where you say, even though I'm working from home, at whatever time is suitable to me, whether it's 5:30, 6 or 7, I'm going to switch my devices off. So my corporate life is going to stop at a certain point. If we allow it to continue, then it will bleed into everything, and it just becomes one really long day. Which is actually even worse, right? Because at least if you're going into an office, you go in at a certain time and you come home at a certain time. So we have to create that switch on, switch off, I think, for ourselves, which is, I think that's where people are being challenged.
Yeah, okay. So I guess there's a question in the audience.
It's a comment more than a question. I mean,
okay.
It's two things which have sort of come up based on what was going on. So one was this thing about Netflix being in competition with sleep. I noticed an article in the BBC today in South Korea. There's apparently a total problem with people not getting enough sleep, partly due to work. And they quoted some woman who was working till 9 o'clock at night, and she would have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to continue. So there's that side of it. But the other side.
Just hold you. I just check. Make sure people can hear you online.
Oh,
Hema,
okay.
Can you hear the gentleman on? Okay. If not, I can provide a microphone.
No, I can hear clearly.
I'm
Okay.
shouting very.
No, I've got a microphone just in
Yeah.
case.
And the other one, of course, is that, I mean, they're talking about stopping companies from sending stuff. You know, there is a cut-off from the company side. And there are some moves that I've heard of various companies where they've told you that you can't send emails to your workforce after 6 o'clock at night or whatever. Now, of course, that runs into all sorts of other issues about people, sort of, you know, the people who want to get the emails. But it does seem that there's kind of some forces which are perhaps going to force organisations to stop some of this stuff. So I say it was a comment more than a...
And some European countries
Yeah,
have legislated again about the hours companies can email their employees and so on.
Well, France is a very good example of that, where they basically put legislation in, say you couldn't, as a manager, you were not allowed to email people at night or at the weekends, which is quite a strong message.
I think it also, just to add on to that, John, though, that there's a thing here about leadership as well. So, you know, as a manager, you also have to be seen to be displaying the right behaviours. So, you know, if you're responsible for a team, looking after that team's well-being is one of your top priorities. So, you know, there's a part of me that also thinks, as an individual, you should have the choice to work whenever it suits you. That's the flexible part of things, right? But also as an individual, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that people with families, with young children, or generally even people, you know, don't want to be working at 8, 9 or 10 o'clock at night. There should not be the expectation that my manager is going to email me, so I have to keep my phone on. It's only when you are constantly sending those emails that people feel that they have to read them. So there's a little bit about behavior there, which is, it's okay as a manager to be working whichever time you want to work. But, you know, there's this fantastic technology, right, that allows you to send emails at a scheduled time. You can write your emails at night and they will still go at the start of the next working day. And I think it's about how we manage behavior as well that comes into this.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll go something.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a nice question from Simon actually, which sort of fits into this, and he's basically saying, obviously, the consensus is that the future of work is an asynchronous, but it clearly comes with some issues. How do you, obviously, Hema and Nigel, feel that we'll overcome some of the issues? For instance, how to maintain a great team culture as people work more and more at different times and in different locations. So that's, you know, this whole conversation around, you know, you can work any time, but you can't because you've got to work together.
Yeah. Well, I think to link into what Hema was saying, which is getting into the burnout versus the quality of life, you know, trend and people seeking out quality of life, and then this question about, which is about the circumcision. So I think during 2 years ago, I was running the IT enablement for our business continuity plan for oil and gas in Europe, Africa, Middle East. And what I had observed is that the individuals were incredibly professional, and some of these folks were, you know, living in, single, double room accommodation with the family was all in the room. They were joining conference calls, Zoom calls, any time of day or night. They had a lot of personal issues and challenges for their family, both health and getting food supplies and so on. But they were incredibly committed to the company and to the mission. So that was incredible to see that. But that led to the high touch, you know, being online for 10 or 12 hours a day, which becomes exhausting. So I think, as Hema was talking about the people seeking the quality of life, I think it reminds me of Dan Pink and the little video sketch. It's about people who are searching for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I truly believe, and as a leader, manager, this is a challenge for me, is to help the organization and our leaders and our employees to shift from task and hour-based, clock-based working to understanding what are the business results and the business outcomes we're trying to generate, and how do you then give people autonomy and mastery over the purpose of the mission. And doing that and trusting that, the trust word, I don't think we've maybe mentioned today, but trust in a virtual environment where you can't see what your people are doing, and maybe you haven't got them aligned on what you want them to do. So trust is a big challenge. So how do you build that trust? that alignment. I am absolutely believe that virtual working is here for sort of non-physical work for forever. But I do believe that there has to be a coming together and a building of the team, the relationships, the mission, the North Star, whatever you call it, the work plan, the goals, so that people can go back to their homes and cupboards and WeWorks and so on, and be productive. Because I will tell you, 2 years ago, I would be happy to go to the office and spend 10 or 12 hours and have coffee and socialise and work and have late meetings. Nowadays, I will, if there's a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting and it's not good use of my time, I'm not going to waste my time on low productive meetings. Because I've seen the daylight, if you like, over the last 2 years, which is being able to get away from the office and getting closer to nature, perhaps, at weekends, no airplanes in the sky. I'm not going to sit at home for 10 hours a day, blindly logging into Zoom calls and Teams calls just because the mothership says so, unless I can add value. So the company I'm now working for, consulting the small fintech startup, a couple hundred people employed. There's folks on the team. The CEO is amazing because he totally trusts people to get on and do the work, and he sets the mission for the team. But we've got folks in London, Madrid, Johannesburg, Auckland, Boston, California, Houston, Texas, right? And less than half the company is co-located in a traditional office. So the concept of getting people together is important to build the team and set alignment, but no longer does this business leader feel he needs to have people in a building. And I think then the technology enablement, simply things like Zoom and Teams help with that. Let me finish briefly on this thought. That's not enough though, because I think nowadays to be productive in a global distributed team, there has to be discipline to use the technology, and there has to be data and workflow re-engineering. Because I cannot run a project to deliver a European project with engineering teams and project managers in different locations if everybody isn't in tune with the same workflow steps and looking at the same data. I don't care which time zone they're in, but they've got to be tuned in and synchronized to the workflow and the data flows. So that's a real challenge, because I think we're not there yet in many companies.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something there, Nigel, which is, obviously we're IT leaders, is what can IT and digital do that can make a difference for organisations to help effectively enable that to happen. You touched on things like seamless workflow, because again, if you can create workflow that enables people to work at any time and connect with each other and catch up from where the transaction started without having to do handovers and things, you're improving the situation. Yep. So I guess ultimately companies want growth or productivity improvement. Basically, no matter what we say, company is there to make more money at the end of the day for the company. They might have some ethical responsibilities and some environmental responsibilities as well, but ultimately they're there to make money for the shareholders, whoever the shareholder happens to be. So I guess, Hema, what are you seeing that is helping to improve productivity if we say people are allowed to have more flexibility to perhaps work at different times or work less? What are you seeing out there that's helping with productivity?
I'm going to answer that in a second, John, if that's all right. But I just want to go back to sorry, I'm going to disrupt you slightly. I want to answer I want to go back to the point that we just raised about, with virtual working now and everybody being remote, how do we actually make sure that we are being more intentional about time together? And I think that's really critical, because, previously, traditionally, being in the office all the time meant that there wasn't really a huge amount of effort that went into team building or morale. It was just something that was expected to happen. And the onus, I think, was very much on individuals building their relationships, building their network. And throughout the pandemic, I've seen a shift. I initially, everybody dove in and everybody was working, long hours. There was a huge amount of burnout. And then over the last 8 or 9 months, what I've seen is a lot of those corporate leaders actually taking a refreshing change, right, and a slightly different lens, which is they have become intentional about the time that people spend together. So I'm seeing that, team meetings, group meetings, they are much more focused around building the team and allowing people to actually spend time to get to know each other rather than, okay, we're going to do a team meeting in person, but we're going to cover these 10 items on the agenda. So I think the focus around how we spend qualitative time together as a team is really important. If we are not meeting on a regular basis every day, then we need to make sure that we allow enough time in the business agenda to be able to do that when we do get the opportunity. We need to still be able to trust each other. We need credibility, and that doesn't come from being online. Unfortunately, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? So, having that intention around giving people time to meet is really important to be successful as a team, I think, going forward. And sorry, I just wanted to make that point because that's really important to me. I think in terms of sort of innovation and how is it helping people to be more productive. So this is a double-edged sword again. There are lots of tools. AI and machine learning is increasing at a very rapid growth. Being able to do automated jobs, workflows, as Nigel said, there are so many tools out there at the moment that are designed to make you more efficient, but they also carry a level of guilt with them. Because if everything that you have on your desktop, your laptop, your mobile phone is making you more efficient, you feel like you need to be tuned into a lot of different channels, and therefore you end up actually creating more work for yourself. And it happens to me. I've deliberately got two mobile phones. I have a personal phone and I have a work phone, and that was a conscious decision for me because when it gets to a certain point in the evening, the work phone gets switched off. It's not even that I just don't look at it, I actually physically turn it off. And that's something that I've started to do through the pandemic because I need to know that I'm no longer required on that channel. It's the same with things like LinkedIn. Constantly people are surfing, they feel they need to be posting about all of the wonderful work they're doing and all the great achievements. You are, but do it at a pace that's reasonable for you. You don't constantly have to be showing other people what you're doing because you can still be effective by doing a little bit less, right? A little bit less is actually okay now. And I think that's the thing that people need to be okay within themselves, that it's not the 50-hour week, it's not the 60-hour week, it's not that you have to be overperforming. It's perfectly reasonable to be able to, to do a normal job and have a life afterwards. Saying that, I mean, there are great tools, right? I mean, Teams, Google Workspace, AWS, that collaboration suite of having everything in a single window. You get your emails, you can create your tasks, your calendars in the one place, you can join meetings from straight from there, you can do your learning and your training from a single interface. I think bringing all of that together certainly helps. But again, it comes down to only use the things that are good for you. There's always going to be a new technology. There's always going to be something else that will be developed tomorrow. Find the balance that works for you as an individual, because that's when you'll be productive. If you try and use everything, that will just make more work, I think, for you, right? So I think there's always innovation there in technology. Don't be afraid of AI. If an automated tool or a solution is offered to you, give it a go. Actually give it a chance to see whether or not it will help you. So, when people are talking about consuming cloud these days, moving a workload from an on-premise location into the cloud used to take weeks of planning before. It used to take huge teams that would get together for months on end before even a single piece of code was migrated. It can all be done with a few clicks today, and it can take less than 5 minutes or 10 minutes to actually start to migrate things. So technology is great. Go and try it out, but do the things that you're comfortable with, because that's what will make you productive.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, Hema. I think that reminded me of a time when I first started, but actually people said, you can only do so many things at once. How many of those things? There's a study around it, wasn't it? Where I think it's about 3. If you try and do more than 3 things, 3 pieces of work, you actually spend more time moving from one item of work to the next one, rather than actually getting something done. And maybe that's the same tools. If you have 50 different tools, you're never actually going to achieve anything because you're looking at Facebook, you're looking at Twitter, you're looking at Instagram. All you're doing is looking at things. You're not actually doing anything. Yeah. Or you might feel like you're doing something, but you're not in reality.
Yeah, and one of the biggest complaints that I hear about a lot is whether it's Microsoft Teams or whether it's Google Workspace. There's a chat function that allows you to start speaking to people about a project, instantaneously from an email or a calendar invite. And people always say to me, I've got hundreds of these chat rooms that are open, right? The noise from all of those chat rooms is distracting me. And it always makes me smile because I say to them, have you muted any of them? Oh, I didn't know that we could mute them. What does that mean? You choose as an individual the things that are important to you and the things that you need to check and when you check them. And I think that's where sometimes people forget that when a piece of technology is delivered to them, it's not a question of you accept it as it is. You configure it, you make it work for you. So you decide, do I need to have access to 20 or 30 chat rooms? No, because you can't possibly keep up with that. So what are the things that are important to me today or tomorrow? And I can go and toggle them on and off, right? So I can go and choose to read those updates when I'm ready. And again, I think it's about, people taking control and realizing that they are actually in control of some of these tools.
A couple of things. I wanted to come back to your point about intentionality, and Nigel, you talked about starting in business analysis, which is where I came into IT, and I valued being in the office because I could check in with project management, procurement, engineering. I could just sit by someone's desk, say, how's it going, what are you wrestling with at the minute? And that, to do that intentionally, requires a lot more effort. If I have to book people's diaries, find a slot, let them know it's just a coffee chat, that's quite a different work pattern. And then I think from a leadership point of view, one of the things we're seeing is people are saying, I don't need to come back in the office because I'm perfectly efficient at home. But as a leader, actually, I have to be really careful that the organisation doesn't become siloed, because everyone's sat doing their functional job, connecting with people they need to do to get stuff across their desk, that the cross-functional discussion starts to not happen. And that tends to be where the organisation breaks down ultimately, is not people not doing their work, but not having a wider awareness of what's happening and not getting together to solve problems cross-functionally.
Yeah.
And I think, again, as a leader, how do you, thinking about how you can facilitate that when people are being given choices about where they sit and how they operate?
Those are absolutely great points, and I think there's a long-term erosion of early career folks not getting coached and mentored. That's how we learn, was being in the office and going to lunch with people and having those side conversations, or travelling with somebody and having a beer in the evening or a coffee or at lunchtime. That's how you as an early career person you grow and you learn and you get confidence and you build your network. Because I think the other issue is not just collaborating on the work, but building your human or your professional network. And I think that's one of the things, if you look back in our careers, and if you start to sort of put your network together, you're surprised how many people or over the in locations and so on. But if you don't have that, you absolutely cannot build that network through Zoom and Teams. 1 hour slots every week. I guess the question would be what leadership techniques can we use to break through that barrier of getting people together to collaborate? So, some companies are saying, you want to be in the office Tuesday and Thursday, or the team has to pick 2 days a week and have a team collaboration day. It's very difficult because I know that in our colleagues in the US, people are resigning if they're told to come back to the office, because they'll go and work for another company and get a 30% pay rise.
Yeah.
So how do you generate that that understanding that it's come together? I don't know how any comments in the room here on that?
Well, I actually had a kind of a follow-up question into that. It's more one of the main kind of workforces that have been impacted by this future of work is graduates. So
Yes.
graduates coming out of university the last couple of years, we've all had that experience of pre-COVID, of, as you said, going for a beer after work, having that networking opportunity. So it's more, what would you be advising graduates entering the workforce as to how they deal with that being siloed, not meeting colleagues possibly for 6 months to a year?
Well, I'll give you a little story. My nephew graduated from Nottingham in engineering 3 years ago, and his first job was one of the big 5 accountancy firms doing training as an auditor. He never was in the office once in a year and a half, to meet any of his colleagues. He was shipped binders for his study time. So he fixed that by resigning and went to Strathclyde to start a PhD.
Right.
And he's loving it because he's sponsored by industry, he's co-located in the labs and having a great time up there. So I hope the social human animal in us all, some of us, breaks through and sees the need, that sees the value of getting back to the office and collaborating. And when I come in on the train here to London, and you see the numbers of people in the tube station and so on, clearly people are back because they want to be back and collaborating again, so that's good. But I hope as individuals we start to see that, and we're going to have to get the critical mass back to the office again.
But I think it comes back to this concept of what we as leaders got to do. I think, to your comment, when I've hired people that have never been to the office, and they're very comfortable staying at home. Is that the right thing? They don't know anything different. That's the challenge. And so how do you encourage people to get connected? And I think you can't just say to somebody, I'm going to force you to come to the office, because that's not the right answer. Because, like you said, they're just going to resign because they're uncomfortable, or go and find a job where what they're used to. So I think we've got to encourage, and we've got to show people the benefits of coming together, and recognise that it's not going to be an immediate thing, because they're going to feel difficult. It's going to feel difficult. It's going to feel hard. Even I felt that. Coming here today, there was a lot of preparation. I had to find out what train I wanted to come on. I had to connect for a different area. I've not been to this office before. There's a lot of new experiences that, yes, it would have been far easier just to pick up the phone at home for an hour and a half and just dial in, rather than spend 8 hours of a day for the same thing. But the quality of the conversation I am getting just by seeing some of you here and talking to you before the event, and I've talked to some people on the train on the way here, I would have lost all that. And that's what you've got to be able to demonstrate to people, is who've never experienced that's the value that they're going to get.
I think someone said earlier about focusing on outcomes, and I guess some of these things we're talking about are us becoming conscious of what our process was pre-pandemic, and how we got stuff done, and what was important to us to be successful. So part of it is reworking and saying, how do I get the same outcome with a different set of communication channels and a slightly different culture? So I notice as people use Teams more and chat function more, the style of conversation shifts. People using more informal language and more graphics and GIFs and emojis starting to appear everywhere. And I think that's good, because it helps people feel relaxed and more. So we're kind of adapting in that way as human beings, like you say. And I think it's important that we don't kind of spend the next 10 years saying, well, before the pandemic, because that's not a helpful reference point perhaps now for the future.
I think as well, just to add one thing, around this comment about location, we shouldn't forget that the office is a fluid thing as well now. So I've seen a lot of companies who have sort of, following on from what Nigel said, a lot of companies are saying, is there a specific day in the week or a couple of days where it makes sense for a team to come together? And I think as long as people are honest and open, and they communicate with each other to say what works and what doesn't work, usually you can find a rhythm that is suitable. But also I've seen that throughout the last couple of years, smaller groups of people, when they've been able to, have got together locally. So, yes, we might have big teams, but that doesn't mean that you can't meet on a much smaller scale informally, because it's about the interaction that you get. It's about the team building. It's about the ideation. Can you brainstorm with other people? Because we feed off the energy we give to each other, when we're all in a room. So I think, don't forget the power of that as well. It's okay for 3 or 4 people or 5 people to meet at a central location informally, because that will still give you the results that you want.
Yeah, I think that's what's coming a lot on the chat, which I've just put on the screen, by the way, because I think, Jackie, you made a good comment that, it's good to sit in the room, but there's a lot of conversation around these drop-ins, virtual conversations, creating this ad hoc environment, because, the formal meeting is not where things happen. It's always those side conversations, and, that was one of the things, when I was doing my job, the reason I used to travel so much, a lot of the senior conversations that happen with the big decisions would happen in our head office in Houston, and they wouldn't happen during the meeting that I was attending remotely. It would always be before the meeting or just after or in the break session.
Yeah.
And we had to force the decision to say we want to travel there to be involved and engaged in that. Now, the big question for us as leaders is how can we make that happen? Because not everybody's got that facility. If you've got folks in India or in Brazil, or they're never going to have the opportunity to keep flying around the world to come and see you, and we can't just disconnect those people. So, anybody got any ideas on how do you make those virtual sessions work? Because ultimately, that's what's going to have to happen.
Well, maybe I'll just, something that comes to mind. I think as leaders, we can't assume that everybody in our virtual organization knows what's going on, knows what's important, and is aligned and able therefore to be productive and enjoy their job. So I think as a leader, there's a lot of work for us to, Jonathan will know this, to create clarity and not just barrage our folks with more emails and more material and information, but figure out how do you lead. I was talking on Monday when I was in Paris about the customer journey through mobile payments technology, through your payments apps, and but how do you take your employees and your teams through the alignment journey to say, right, here's what's happening in the big world outside our business. Here's what our business goals and strategies are, and some of the challenges we're seeing in our industry or our business. Here's the critical project objectives or goals for this year, and then you translate that down to the team, and create some time for people to go into virtual breakout rooms, discuss those. What does it mean to me? Operationalize it, internalize it, and then be able to, feel ownership for that, or at least understand it and make a choice of, do I want to align with this or not? So that's one of the things I really liked about Zoom. I don't know if it's available on Teams, but Zoom had these breakout rooms. So you could take 40 people and split them into 10 breakouts for half an hour, go and here's some material, go and talk about it, come back. And that was really a very effective way of building a little bit of buy-in and understanding. But I think there has to be time, not just broadcasting to folks, but actually engaging. So engaging online is very, very difficult. But that takes me back 2 years ago to what where we were thrown into that.
Yeah, no, it does. But that may well be a trend that we start to see. Now, as one of the questions is, what do we see as some of the trends or opportunities, and maybe it is that virtual huddle sort of concept.
I think the other thing, is that, and it's not since the pandemic, but it's been around certainly the last couple of decades that I've seen is how do you, not just remote workers, individual remote workers, but network matrixed organizations. You may have 100 people in Guildford and 100 people in Prague and 100 people in Budapest, but how do you get teams working together virtually, that are matrixed? And there's some fantastic techniques that Jonathan and I went through with our last company, which was really very simple but quite sophisticated in how you get teams to start talking and trusting each other. Because engineering teams, whether it's IT or sort of heavy industry engineering, doesn't matter. Engineers like to pull down the shutters and solve problems themselves and not always share information. So how do you start to get the network of virtual teams to start connecting and collaborating to be productive? So it's the team of teams concept, which we can take that offline as a conversation perhaps. But and that's one of the areas that I guess I've personally shifted from managing and directing to being trying to support the leaders and bringing more techniques back to the organization in terms of how do you open up the conversation and get people to share and collaborate. Because if you don't, you can be guaranteed your productivity is around 20%, 20 to 40% max. because people are not working on the right things, or not sharing vital information, or whatever, so that's really a problem.
Yeah. So I guess, Hema, as you work for Microsoft, what are you seeing as the company focusing on to try and improve that sort of connectivity and collaboration between the virtual and people who are physically in the office?
And there's a few things actually, and all of them are quite positive. I would say that certainly respect is probably top of mind. And it is respect in the sense that understanding how people want to work. Is somebody comfortable being on video all the time? That's a huge thing. Over the last 2 years, we've all been forced to be on video from 8 in the morning through to late at night or whatever. And then I think at a certain point, individuals realized that they didn't need to be on video. It's perfectly acceptable, whenever it suits you, to be available as an avatar, to be available in person, or to be on video. And I think that the consensus around the acceptance of that, as it's your choice as the individual, it's not mandatory that you have to show your face, came down to the role of the employer and the employee changing slightly. A few decades ago, it was very much you turned up, you went to a meeting, you were always visible, and you did what your manager told you. Today, the employee is in charge and is dictating how they want to work. So, collaboration tools for me is very much about being respectful of how people want to work in the first instance. I think in terms of tools themselves, Teams is great as an interface, as I said already. Google Workspace is an absolutely brilliant tool as well in terms of collaboration. And then we come to things like the virtual whiteboards, which allow large groups of people to be able to go in and collaborate at the same time, and to create that whiteboard effect, right? Which is you don't need to be there in person to do it. You're all contributing, you're all on an equal playing field. The same with things like Miro boards, having the accessibility to a collaboration tool where you can put sticky notes in, you can attach diagrams, you can create narrative on there, you can embed videos, etc. And it's creating that holistic view of, and going back to what Nigel said, irrelevant of your role in the team, it's a place for you as a team to come and collaborate and work together. And I'm seeing huge uptake in people just starting to do a lot more collaboration like that, and then feeling included as part of that. So, it's no longer I have to write a Word document and send it to somebody who's going to approve it, and then they're going to paste, into something else. And also, what I'm seeing is there's a lot more uptake around the informal methods of communicating and tools rather than, the formal. So PowerPoint is a great way of presenting, but it's actually you speaking to an audience. And actually what we need now is, and what we're seeing is that the audience wants to be part of what you're doing. So using those tools that are collaborative, allow the audience to come into that part of the session. I think also as well, things like Lego Serious Play, which is nothing to do with technology, right, is a great way of engaging people through the use of Lego bricks to actually run a workshop, a transformation thinking workshop, using hands and minds to think together and work together, and then giving everybody a safe space to speak in. Some people are comfortable speaking on video, some people are not. So having the remote tools is great, but the other side of that, the downside is you have to be really, really careful and listen out for the people who are perhaps a little bit shy or not comfortable speaking up, because you don't want to alienate them. So finding other ways of engaging them and bringing them into the conversation through something like Lego is also a really, really effective way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment, Hema. I think it's something we shouldn't forget is that, it's like when we had physical meetings, there was always people that felt left out. Either you didn't engage them in the meeting, or they did, were shy and wouldn't feel like they could speak up. But I think, and that occurs in the virtual world as well. So we've got to continue to sort of support those folks. Yeah. I'm going to switch gear a little bit, and Daniel raised a comment in here. Now I don't know if you've got any experience in automation or robotics, but besides the virtual working, there are other things that are happening. I was reading the paper a couple of days ago that I think one of the big department stores has just installed a robot to help people build handbags, of all things. So you can actually do an on-demand handbag creation. But the question is, are these things like robotics, automation, where do you see them having a place in the office environment?
Well, I was going to maybe take Daniel's question. I think he's asking us to broaden the topic a
Yes.
bit. So one theme I had was, how technology is changing the work we do, the stuff we actually work on, or how we deliver value. Beyond business, I think you've got academic, education, and you've got health services and the health sector. So I think one of the things that I think technology and we as technology leaders can make a huge contribution to society is the concept of education. So if you can get O3B or sort of networks into developing countries, and you can figure out how to get low-cost laptops delivered. This whole concept of virtual working, well, poor me, I have to sit at home, my desk for 12 hours a day doing boring work in Teams. Or you can, enable a teacher in Scotland or Canada or Nigeria to teach thousands of children, across the African continent using technology. And, in Europe, we've had to go to online homeschooling. Many parents have had to do that over the last 2 years. But my goodness, look at the opportunity to take some of the technology and the processes and the pivots we've made. Pivot is a word I hated 2 years ago, but I used to use it a lot because we've done a lot of pivoting, whatever that means. But if you take the pivot we've made in education, just in the UK, some of those concepts can now be scaled and transported to solve huge social and deprivation problems and access problems. For example, educating girls and children in Africa where they don't get access. So yes, you need a network, but the technology is there. And my goodness, imagine if we were running a sort of an English class or a maths class, and you could teach 1,000 to 10,000 children in one session through Teams or Zoom. Now that technology is available. So I think back to Daniel's question is, how do we think more broadly about how technology is transforming traditional jobs and professions and work we do, and where's the opportunity there? Yeah. So I think the other technology theme, not necessarily IT technology, although it is IT enabled, is of course the energy transition, moving to electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, hydrogen, and so on, wind farms, whatever that might be. So the amount of technology and process control technology, but also systems management and distribution and user interfaces that's going into all of that is amazing. So I think there's a vast opportunity now, and we're going to see a shift where some jobs will fall off the radar, either go away, be offshored or automated. But there's a lot of new jobs being created.
Yeah, well, I guess Hema, in your area, in the health sector, which you're obviously responsible for in Microsoft, you must be seeing quite a significant amount of change.
There is, and it's an interesting point actually, because a few years ago, robotics was a subject that we perhaps didn't talk about very often. But one of the biggest sectors that's adopted robotics and AI significantly and with speed has been specifically around healthcare. Whether it's robots that are being used in assisted living facilities that are helping people to live more independently for longer, whether it's the use of smart technology and robotics that are being used to scan hundreds and hundreds of x-rays in a matter of seconds, so that radiographers and radiologists can actually spend time treating the people who really need it rather than hours and hours of poring over those x-rays. We're seeing that all the time. Robots are being used to help out in hospitals, so smart hospitals. There are robots that are doing the jobs of porters, and we've seen robots, for years, whether people realize it or not, in most contact centers. So the process that you go through, whether you are ringing your local government, your central government, whether you're in a healthcare facility, a social care facility, even in education, 9 times out of 10, when you ring a call center line, you will speak to a robot initially. And, we are so sophisticated today that 9 times out of 10, you won't realize that it's a robot. By the time you actually get put through to an agent, your call history has been given to that agent. That agent actually knows exactly what you're looking for. what your query is, where you need to be redirected to, and they only actually end up doing a very small percentage of the actual transaction with you. So, you know, robots are not going to go away, analytics are not going to go away. And I think, you know, one of the most transformative areas has been the use of AI, virtual reality, and mixed reality and 5G, which have all come together to enable us to actually do remote surgery. So, you know, when we talk about modern working and you know, the workplace tomorrow, if you're somebody working in healthcare or the public sector, your workplace now also can be remote. You can see your doctor or your GP remotely. You can actually be treated remotely. You know, I've seen experiments and I've seen surgeries that are conducted where a specialist surgeon from China is operating on somebody who needs urgent care in Europe, and it's being done through the use of mixed reality, which is quite amazing to know that we can actually do that. You know, ambulances are being converted into what we call a smart ambulance. You know, it's equipped with the right technology. It's got the ability to treat people in rural areas, so that we're no longer stuck now in terms of being able to actually only get people to a facility to be treated. You know, again, the concept of office being fluid also applies to healthcare. You know, where you now get treated is also a fluid thing. It's no longer stuck to being a facility. So yeah, I mean, you know, we could spend a whole session talking about transformation in healthcare, and I'd get very excited about that.
Yeah, there's some good points there, absolutely.
So Hema, yeah, very exciting. I'm going to throw a little bit of a wobbly into the conversation here, because I think, and you know, you shouldn't believe everything you read or hear in the press, but there's two things come to mind. One is the culture, the ingrained culture in large organizations, and the barrier to change and adoption of technology change and new working practices. And then the other one is the trade unions who are not incentivized to adopt that without getting some bonus payments or something. And I'm just, you know, relaying a lot of the stuff that's played out in the press in the last 2 years, unfortunately, about, you know, GP practices and the National Health Service culture, and that's I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the reality is that the change management of adopting new technology and new working practices is a huge social challenge for us. So,
and
it's
I think that applies to any industry, to be fair,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
No, and it's, you know, it's one of those things where I always say technology is great if you include the user. If you try and force a technology on somebody, or you try and create a piece of, you know, solution without actually having the end user as part of that design process, it's probably going to fail because it won't be adopted. It's probably not going to be the right solution for them. And it's the same in healthcare. You know, I've seen previously it was very much, let's go out and buy the technology that we need because it will solve an issue. Or it was even along the lines of, let me go to the vendor who gives me the biggest discount and I'll buy that product, right? And we've all been there and we've all seen it. And what I've seen is a complete mind shift in the last few years of those people now, you know, the senior CIOs in across not just the NHS, but across healthcare, you know, globally, who are actually saying, as part of that design process, the clinician needs to be there at the start. You know, the GP needs to be there. The nurses need to be there. You know, and I always say that in healthcare, the successful failure of an IT project is down to the nursing persona. It's the nurses who deliver care at the bedside, at the reception desk, right? And if they are not bought in, it doesn't matter how fantastic your solution is, it's never going to be successful. So you're absolutely right. I think it's recognizing that people have opinions and need to be part of that process from start to end means that even as a technologist, we could have some fantastic ideas, but if we're not delivering the healthcare outcome that's necessary and important to the person who needs to do that, then we'll have missed the mark. So, you know, that level of inclusion is absolutely critical.
Yeah, so maybe, and I think Simon's picked up on that as well as one of the questions. So I guess something to think about, you know, obviously lots of great ideas, lots of exciting new things that are coming along. Is there the potential that we are excluding certain people who perhaps don't have who are either, you know, very cautious of change, or don't even feel that they don't have the technology to come along on the journey? What's your thoughts on that, Nigel?
I think change management is a huge theme. So I think it needs to be part of the, you know, the programs that we have. The one thing, I was in a bank, one of those rare things called a bank branch recently, and there was a lady in there who was possibly in her 70s, and she was at the counter, and she was very excited because she was telling the lady behind the counter that she had finally got onto the Lloyds Bank app, and she could see her bank balance and everything. And just before they closed down her branch, that was a pretty good thing for her to achieve. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability for folks to adopt technology, but I think it's facilitating that change. So I think really the point is making sure the human factors and culture change are baked into some of these programs. But again, the pandemic, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Have you ever said that originally? So you see the pandemic has actually accelerated a lot of technology change and adoption, right? So most of us probably now have had to download an NHS app. If you want to go abroad, you have to get your passports and things up to date. So I think that's where we are. But there is a real risk that there's parts of society and communities that get left behind, and the divide and in society isn't improving and isn't getting better.
Well, I think
so I guess another question I was going to ask earlier was to the floor was, the 4-day working week. Is that attractive? So would anybody take 15% pay cut, gross pay cut for a 4-day working week? So are we all chasing, more leisure time, or not? Is that if technology can change that? And I think the flip side of that is I don't see teachers and teacher assistants and nurses and doctors and surgeons working 4 days a week, and us still having all of the social services and services that we expect in a first world country. So I think there's a lot of tension still to work through on this question of the future of work.
Well, I think that comes down to that combination, isn't it, of how much can you automate or take away from the individual to enable them to have that 4-day week. Because it's okay saying to somebody, yeah, would you like one? But in reality, how am I going to achieve it is a different matter.
I think that point about diversity on there is an interesting one, because there's been a lot of discussion about cameras on or off and avatars or photos and all this kind of thing. So there actually will be people who are now much more able to contribute, because they're not sat in an office where people can see that there's something different about them.
Yes.
They're just a voice now. And so I think, whereas some of us who've been used to sitting in an office are now starting to feel uncomfortable because we're saying, well, I can't see people. But if you are partially sighted or blind, that's always been your life. Welcome everybody else. Now you've just arrived. So I think it's a really good stimulus for us to be more creative and think about that way of including people actually gives us many advantages perhaps than what we had before. It challenges our assumptions about how things should work and how we should relate to each other. So I think that's probably a good thing, and the fact that participation, the streaming of events, people's ability to participate in all sorts of social and cultural activities, for many people has been a real boon, because it's been online. They don't have to travel to go to a festival or hear someone speak. So I think there's so many positives in that, looking at diversity from that point of view.
Diversity.
And I think that's a really, sorry, Nigel, I was just going to say, I think that's a really interesting point actually, and I'm gutted that we've only just come to it when we're about to close. But if you think about how your experience is when you log in, whether it's Zoom or whether it's Teams or Google Workspace or AWS, there's so much functionality there that is there to accommodate everybody, that a lot of people still don't realize it's there. There are speech to text translation services. There is, the ability to increase the text size so that as somebody is speaking, if you're hard of hearing and have hearing problems, you don't need to just rely on actually seeing that person. The text is automatically there for you. It's predictive text. It will pick up everything that's being said. The same way for accessibility issues, you have the ability to control how big, how small your screen is, whether or not certain words are highlighted for you. So that concept of the experience that you have is really important. And I would really encourage people to go away and actually just do a little bit of digging. And this also comes back to another point that I want to make, which is technology is great, and there is a lot out there. There's been so much that's been released in the last few years around how to connect people more frequently, how you do things. But it also brings with it the burden of enablement and education. You know, not everybody sitting at home is comfortable enough to be able to just pick up what these new things mean. So there is an onus, I think, on an employer and on the tech company to make sure that these new solutions are simple and accessible. You know, are we doing enough to educate people so that they can actually then adopt them and really understand, you know, okay, this is something that I can actually relate to. It's not difficult because it's technology. It's something that I'm already doing, and it's something that's easy for me to do. You know, how do I turn on translation services? How do I make sure that, you know, the volume on my laptop is already automatically set at the right level for me? You know, there's a huge amount there. I mean, we could go on forever, but those sorts of accessibility features are becoming more and more prominent in everything that we do. So, you know, please look out for them.
Yeah. But it is on that point, it's amazing how you can become more inclusive. Like, you know, I was talking to Hema earlier about concerts, music concerts, and, you know, there's a number of those that I attended virtually. But, you know, and that was a whole new market for some artists. You know, they never thought, you know, prior to COVID, who would have thought actually having an online sort of, you know, concert and actually paying, people would pay to go to watch it. And, you know, that was a massive revenue stream for them, which they've never had before. And then, you know, then they're starting looking at how they can combine that into a hybrid event and actually get people more engaged. So there's a whole new markets that come along as a result. So I guess that's perhaps a question I've got for both of you. Like, Nigel, what do you see as some of the opportunities that will come out in the next sort of few years that is something that we, you know, perhaps never thought about, that you know, might be more intriguing for the world?
That wasn't on my script. That's a good question, the opportunities. Well, I think that an opportunity is absolutely around accessibility. So the fact that you know, we can now recruit talent, you know, pretty much anywhere within a pretty wide time zone range, and not based on a 30-mile commute range. So that's fantastic. I'm hopeful for the future. I think the quality of work. I don't think people in sort of first world countries at least will tolerate low quality work. I think the work will have to be stimulating. You know, it has to do with the autonomy, mastery, purpose sort of check boxes, if you like, or, you know, it's about people and interaction. It's about you know, sort of professional growth. That's going to have to be there. I do hope that a lot of lower paid and lower value jobs get automated, but then I don't know how you redeploy that talent pool, resource pool, skill pool. So I think there's a challenge there to reskill, you know, some of the folks who will maybe lose their job. From a sort of an IT leader perspective, I jotted down a few things. I think we've talked a lot tonight, not about technology, but about the human factors and the leadership and the people side, which I think is where a lot of the challenges sit. But I think from a business perspective, my role, and I think IT leaders, we're going to become more customer relationship managers. I think I'm no longer an IT manager or leader. It's about business technology integration, so it's at that interface. I think I have to be a trusted advisor to the business leadership, and I think build those relationships and then be bold to sort of say what you see and start to guide the future. And I think the last thing is coaching and supporting emerging talent, emerging leaders, whether it's technical leadership or organizational leaders, and really all these techniques we talk about is how do you help people have a fantastic career, get the personal growth, and contribute value in this new world we're in. Yeah. But you know, I think change is always with us, and you know, 100 years ago or so ago, there was a lot of horses became redundant because of change when the motor car was introduced. So you know, I think we've got plenty of stories of change and disruption, and I think we're just seeing more and more of the same, but it's going to happen faster. So yeah, great discussion. I can't believe we've spent most of the time. Thank you. Thanks, I've enjoyed being here. Thanks, Jonathan.
It's okay.
Back
But,
to you.
yeah, but I think you're right. There's, you know, we've got to help people and mentor people and develop people because they've not got that experience, and you know, and you learn on both sides. So I guess Hema, from yourself, you know, what do you see as some of the opportunities coming forward?
I see a few, and for me, I think one of the key ones is that we are redistributing balance when it comes to skills and jobs. So, you know, the ability to have a workforce that's global, that's remote, means that that digital skills gap that we've got, we're like, you know, we're enabling ourselves to be able to close it. You can have a development team, you can have the best talent that you want, and it doesn't just have to be local talent. You know, the new Silicon Valley is Africa. You know, there are some absolutely amazing, super hot coding skills coming out of Africa right now. And it's possible to do those jobs, you know, whereas before it would have meant a relocation for the individual. So I think, you know, for me, that's one of the biggest opportunities, that distribution of the quality of role and jobs is now balancing itself out right across the world. I think the second thing for me is mindset. You know, we've proven that we can do anything we want and we can do it quickly. And I don't think that will change. I think, you know, whether it's you're a patient, a teacher, an employee, a citizen, the dynamic has changed. You're no longer dependent on waiting for something to be created or delivered to you. As individuals, we can now dictate what we want. And I think that level of innovation isn't going to go away. I think that will be the biggest opportunity, which is let's actually start listening to what people are asking us for and then develop something. You know, so those two things are key. And then the third one I think is very much around giving everyone a voice. You know, we've talked about people who perhaps might not have been so comfortable in an office before. There is a huge amount of talent out there. There are so many people with fantastic ideas who just aren't confident enough to speak up. And I think the ability to work remotely and in a way that's flexible and feels comfortable to you means that you can be your best self, right? And you can bring that amazing talent to whichever industry you want to be in. So for me, I think the overall theme is that balancing, leveling up and leveling out.
Okay. No, it's very good, yeah. No, it's like I said, I think we talked a lot about inclusion tonight and what it means and how to make sure that there's going to be different types of inclusion as it moves forward. So yes, I know, obviously it's gone quickly. You know, it's the session has effectively come to an end. I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure to host this. As I said, it's the first time we've tried a hybrid event, and it's the first time we've come to this office. Hopefully we'll see a few more people here in the physical presence in the near future. I'd like to thank Hema and Nigel for being involved in the panel and for your active discussion. Thank you very much for that. And we will have more events coming forward. So I've posted on the screen. You'll see our next event is the mass migration. So we're setting that one up next, and that's going to be a virtual only event in July. So again, we'll look forward to some of you attending that. We will hopefully have some face-to-face discussions here as well in the BCS office. What I'm looking to do as sort of the events coordinator for the IT Leaders Forum is to develop some working groups that will then turn into potential events in the future. So if there's a particular topic that you're interested in, either you want to participate in or you would like to present, feel free to drop me a note and we can build that up as an opportunity. Because the more sort of engagement we get from you as the leaders, the better it will be for everybody. The idea is not just the committee presenting these events.